And
Thank you for asking.
absolutely. Welcome, everyone. And we will start, of course, with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Go to the screen share. So this is where we left off. We just got a few more statements to make about the Jubilee year, the Yovel year. And so here we go. Bishnat HaYovel, in this year of the Yovel. Hazot, this Yovel, on the year of this Yovel, Tashuvu ish el achuzato. Every man should return to his holding. In other words, these patrimony. And here's the Rashi on this. Tashuvu ish el achuzato. V'harei kfar ne'emar. Well, it's already stated, v'shavtam ish el achuzato. It was already stated that every man should return to his patrimony. Ella, however, this is lerabot hamocher sadehu. This is to include a case where someone sold his field, the Ahmad Beno, and his son got up, Uga'ala, and he redeemed it. In other words, the situation is Reuven sold a field to Shimon, and of course it's sold, as you know, for the number of years. Let's say he sold it to Shimon for 25 years. That was the amount that was charged. And after 5 years, Reuven's son went and purchased the field back from Shimon. He paid for it and therefore redeemed it. So this is Reuven's son, you understand. The Shechozeret la'aviv beyovel. So this is to tell you, the added information is that in the Yovel year, even though Reuven's son purchased or redeemed the field still goes back to Reuven. In other words, it goes back to the dad in the Jubilee year. And you might have thought that since Reuven's son redeemed it, it would have stayed within the family, and therefore it would have remained Reuven's son's field, but it doesn't. It goes back to Reuven. So that's what this additional, in other words, it emphasizes the fact that the field goes back to the original owner, Now we go on to something a little bit different. V'kchi timkaru mimkar la'amitecha. And if you sell something, this is referring to land though, if you sell property to your fellow, or kano miyad amitecha, or if you purchase something from your fellow, al tonu ish et achiv. A man should not overreach his brother, meaning you shouldn't, when you sell something to someone, you shouldn't charge them too much, you shouldn't overcharge them. And on the other hand, if you're purchasing something from someone, you shouldn't pay them too little. And we come to these laws of what is called hona'ah, of overreaching. And this idea, this is such an interesting thought that the Torah mentions this idea that when you purchase things or when you sell things, you shouldn't be looking for excessive profit.
I just want to point out that what this says, and that is my understanding, that it's only talking about if you're selling to another Jewish person.
Yes, it does sound like it because it says ish et achiv. Right, you're right, Lauren. And this possibly was the cause of anti-Semitism, because obviously non-Jews talked about this, all right? I'm not sure, though, that it says, we can interpret the Torah in more than one way. And I could interpret it to say that it doesn't mean necessarily, even though it may mean your fellow Jew, it is actually saying to us that we should treat each other as brothers.
I agree, but I don't
But you're right.
I believe the rabbis did not teach it that way, and that there were a separate set of
Correct.
regulations for how you would treat a Jewish person versus
Correct.
somebody
The
else.
fellow Israelite. You are right. And the truth is that the Torah actually has, in some cases, support for that particular interpretation. But I then apply this other principle that there were two statements that I have come across which explain what's going on, and which to me support the way in which I'm taking the meaning here. So it could be that the Torah provides a context. I've seen attempts to explain these particular things that rub us the wrong way, to talk about a situation. Justice has to do with the application to everyone. If the rules apply to some people but don't apply to other people who are all in the same basic category, then it's not justice anymore. So the idea that
What do
somebody,
you mean the same basic category?
well, let's put it this way: if you're rich or whether you're poor, there might be some distinctions to be made. But let me give you the best example I can come up with. And Lauren, you have a better understanding because your father was a lawyer of law than I do. But for example, if somebody's on your property and they injure themselves and it's by their own negligence, right? Because it happened on your property, you're still responsible, which doesn't sound fair. But what makes this fair is that it applies to anybody. So if I'm on somebody else's property and I injure myself on their property through my own negligence, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, there may be certain issues within that I will have to take responsibility for. But there's a
Well, the
big
only thing that doesn't ring true to me is that nowadays they're saying you're allowed to hurt or kill somebody who's on your property.
okay. I don't want, that could start a whole different kind of subject.
It can,
I don't want to start that
but
subject.
as far as categories, because there's Israelite and non-Israelite too.
That's right. But in this particular case, okay. So
Say
let me,
something.
yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you. With this, and I can see what you were saying, Mordecai, about some of this being one of the things that has caused anti-Semitism when looked at from one point of view. And also what my takeaway from being involved in now so many of the laws and values of my heritage, one thing that is at the center of that is the Shema, which is treat that what it does is it brings to mind to treat everyone as if as well as yourself, treat your neighbor almost better than yourself. So when it comes to dealings with all peoples, not just Jewish people, I translate these values that I'm learning here very broadly, considering the times and bringing them into life right now as to treat everyone fairly, not just Jewish people.
So, Lisa, I want to give you support from an interpretation of the Shema, which says, "V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha," you shall love the Lord your God, which the rabbis also changed the pointing. There's no vowel points in the Torah, and they translated it as sort of I don't know exactly the form it would take, but instead of being a po'al, they translated it sort of into a hifil form, and they pointed the va'ahavta in such a way that it means you shall cause to be loved. In other words, you shall cause the Lord your God to be loved, and to
Cool.
in a way that brings people in. So let me finish this point that I'm sorry it's taking time, because
Okay.
Lauren's question is it's a very deep question. The point that this particular commentator was making was that because other people were treating Jews in that particular way, that there were laws in the country which allowed people to treat Jews in this unfair kind of way. It set up a situation where if Jews, that's just the way people were behaving. There's a law in selling iron, like when you sell basically pig iron to another company, you're allowed to salt the iron, it's sold by weight, and you're allowed to allow a certain amount of non-iron. In other words, I can't think of the word right now, but stuff that isn't really iron, and you're allowed to
Refining.
add. Say that again. Sorry.
Refining.
No, I'm thinking of just the opposite, that the point is that when you sell this, you can sell along with it, along with the weight, you can sort of salt it with other kinds of stuff. And because everybody does it, it's understood as common practice, and it's not considered illegal. So
Yeah, impure. I mean, that's
that's
it.
right. You can sell it with impurities. You're allowed to sell it with impurities. So we need to understand how law works. And the fact is that if everybody's doing it, it can become legal. Now, that's just one argument to sort of take it that way. But I
I
want
think
to take.
that's Tret.
Is that what it's called?
I think so.
TRETT?
TRET is just allowing extra weight of something,
Yes.
knowing that it's a part of, the
Right.
commerce.
Right. Yes. Okay. So that's just to sort of give a context to this law. I don't think it doesn't make me happy, but the way I would understand it, right? Because of that, as Lisa was pointing out from the Shema, right? That interpretation of the ahavta, right? You shall cause God to be loved. There are two statements. One is biblical and one is rabbinic. So the biblical, let's start with the biblical statement, and it's basically the last verse of Hosea. And I'm sorry I don't have it memorized, but basically it says, Hosea says, the ways of the Lord are smooth, the righteous shall live by them, and the wicked will stumble by them. And my interpretation of that is that we have statements like the ones we're coming across, where you could interpret it in that way, and it's not a righteous way to look at it. In other words, you're looking for an excuse to do something that is unjust or may be unjust, and you're finding biblical support for it. And that's what Hosea is saying in saying that the ways of the Lord are smooth. The rabbinic source is from Pirkei Avot, which says there are 4 types of students that sit before the sages. And they're compared to a sponge, a funnel, a sifter, and a strainer. That's what they can be compared to. What is the sponge? Absorbs everything. Funnel, in one ear and out the other. The sifter is the one that sorts out the bran from the pure wheat, right? And retains just the fine flour, which implies, of course, that in all this material, in all this Torah that we're studying, there is bran. And that's bran. This comes under the category of bran. And then there's the strainer. The strainer leaves out all the good stuff. All the good stuff goes through the strainer, and the strainer retains the dregs. And those two statements inform me on how I'm to study Torah. So much of rational thinking is dependent on where your heart is. And I see it going on, and people think they're being 100% rational, and that's not true. And we have to be able to look into our hearts and say, how am I looking at it? Because your heart is the filter. And your heart will filter out. It'll just act like these 4 different students that are mentioned in Pirkei Avot.
Gosh, this
just
is
love everything, okay? Or, I'm not really that interested, so I'm not going to focus,
No, but this is awesome, because so many times people make decisions about other people's lives and have no consideration for looking beyond what this black and white situation is in front of their eyes, instead of what long-term consequences are for others. So looking through a filter of love like this, and values, and inclusiveness for all, that's how I am bringing my studies to myself and into the world from this.
And Rabbi, this is one of the reasons I choose you as a teacher, because these interpretations and the explanations you gave with those 2 texts, I had not heard before. I had not heard that one from the Shema. I mean, I liked Lisa's version of it, but I hadn't heard anything like that before. And I don't think that they're very well taught. But yet they're there. And I'm so thankful that after all these years of being, unhappy with some of this stuff that I've been learning, that you've taught me a way to look at it differently and be more comfortable.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. You can imagine how excited I was when I read that Hosea verse and realized what the interpretation could be, and also that Pirkei Avot verse, which had never occurred to me. In other words, sometimes what it doesn't say says a lot, okay?
Mhm.
So yes, you can either say, well, it's just your brother Jew and fellow Jew that you can treat fairly, or you can say, no, what the Torah has really come to teach you is that you need to consider everyone your brother. And by brother, of course, I mean brother and sister.
Amen.
So, I mean, there's such beauty here. And the trouble is, if you look at it from the ugly side, right? If you put on that ugly filter or that ugly lens, then you just start to reject everything. And it's so unfortunate. It's tragic, because you can see in the amount of time that we spent together how transforming this process is. And it just lifts your heart. I mean, you have to know just how grateful I am that this has been open, that this door has been open for me. I mean, when I say this is the life and the length of our days, that is not just a trite saying. It is a profound saying, because, certainly as I get older and recognize my own mortality and say, what have I really accomplished in my life? How have I used my life, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, if I never had this, right? If I wasn't given that particular invitation to study this material, or that God put into my heart a desire to study or curiosity about it, right?
Mordecai,
Yeah.
this is how we get to transmit this to the next generations.
I wish.
With this openness. Well, you have made that opening for me, and I am making that opening for others. So it's not just about wishing, it's that it's happening. And
Yes.
this is the living Torah.
Right, exactly. It
Well,
has to be a living Torah. It has to
Would
be.
you send an email or something with those two statements that you used to justify these interpretations? There was one from Hosea
Right, and one from
and something else. I know that I.
Right. Pirkei Avot from Ethics of the Father.
Because those I want to really have that concretely to remember, because Lisa's right. This is something worth spreading that I don't think has spread well.
Okay. Let me, what I'd love to do is maybe write it, write an article. I need to write a rabbi's column. So this could be the subject of my next rabbi's column. I mean, the truth is that, I'd love to take the time that apparently is going to become available to me to actually try and do some writing, if God will help me and inspire me and give me the time, et cetera, et cetera.
Writing and teaching.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's do this first. And you'll see, I don't think Rashi, goes in the direction, Lauren, that you pointed out, at least not explicitly, which is lovely that he doesn't say it, okay? V'chi timkaru, and if you were to sell. Lefi pshuto, according to its simple meaning, kamashma'o, that's its implication. You can just look at this and understand it for what it is, okay? V'od yesh drasha, there's another interpretation. Min ayin, from where do we derive? Keshe'ata mocher, so he is saying this, okay? But I felt he was taking this in a different kind of way. He said, if you want to sell something, mechor liYisrael, sell it to a fellow Jew. In other words, we have this in Sonoma County a lot, where they tell you to buy local. I didn't see it so much in St. Louis, but I can tell you, possibly the economy is a little bit more.
It's here. It's here. It's been here for years.
Right, but buy local. In other words, make sure that your own community, and if everybody's buying local, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not, and he's not saying, only sell to an Israelite. He doesn't say that. He's saying, if you're going to sell something, give some preference to selling it to a fellow Israelite. Okay? Chavercha, your fellow. Talmud lomar. And that's why scripture says, in other words, he's saying, where do you derive this principle? V'chitim karu mimka. If the use of the language here is, if you're going to sell mimkar la'amitecha machor. He says, if you sell, putting a comma sort of to say this, if you are to sell merchandise, sell it la'amitecha machor. Sell it to your fellow. Uminayin she'im bata liknot, and if you're going to buy something, kaneh mi-Yisrael. And there is this idea within the Jewish community that we need to take care of our own. Saying we need to take of our own isn't saying we need to take exclusively of our own. It's not saying, oh, don't concern yourself about others. But I think, this was one of Charles Dickens's big soapboxes, right? He wrote some of his novels. One of the things that Dickens sort of preaches about are the for example, this person who loves supporting the people in Africa, right? The pygmies in Africa, and her own children are going without shoes. And I think that's what this is addressing. That if you're not taking care of your own family, but you're doing such good for others, that's not right. That's not right. We have to take care of, and it's like the Hillel saying, remember, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm for myself alone, then what am I?
These are building blocks for community.
Of course.
And community, then you can support that outside.
That's right. Community. It's just setting some priorities. It's just trying to prioritize things. And that's how I'm understanding Rashi right here. And I totally get it. And I think he's absolutely right. And of course, he's quoting rabbinic sources. Talmud Lomar. And so likewise, if you're going to sell something, give preferential treatment to a fellow Israelite. Or kano miyad amitecha. Or if you buy miyad amitecha, it should be from your fellow. Okay. Let's see. I think it might be a little bit more, but we're running out of time.
One more Rashi, small.
Good. Okay, so we'll finish with this. Al tonu. Do not overreach. Torat Kohanim. This is from, of course, a Sifra. And Baba Metzia, by the way, the tractate of Baba Metzia goes heavily into this idea of hona'ah. Okay, and it says, Zo ona'at mamon. This has to do with overreaching financially. There's also something later on, because it repeats this kind of mitzvah, and Rashi says that's a reference to something called ona'at dvarim, overreaching with words, which is like giving someone bad advice. So but again, the idea of ona'ah, and later on elsewhere, it talks about charging interest, and that kind of way of doing it. Ribit is what it's called. And neshech. So you know that there are prohibitions against charging interest. Unfortunately, there are things that wouldn't happen that are good, that require some profit to be made. So that's a whole other subject, maybe to be dealt with at another time. But that's where I'm going to stop today. And although I see I have like 2 minutes. So, okay, I'll just do one quick, although there's a long Rashi on this.
Very long Rashi, but you could read the...
Yeah. So, but just to read the verse, the mispar shanim achar hayovel, according to the number of years following the Jubilee year. In other words, the Torah is giving a specific example of what they mean by saying overreaching, right? So, according to the number of years following the Jubilee, tikneh me'et amitecha, you should purchase from your fellow. And what are you really purchasing? The mismar shnei tvuot yim korlach. He should give you at least the number of, shnei tvuot can mean the number of years of harvests he should sell to you. And as Rashi's going to explain, and the Torah itself is basically going to say, if in fact, let's say there are 5 years left to the Jubilee year, and so you've got basically 5 harvests, you might have 6 if he sells it to you early, then you can sell it according to a lesser price than you would have to pay if it was from from the beginning of the Jubilee cycle. If you're going to get 50 harvests, then the charge for the field has to be proportionately greater. And he's saying, so if the seller sells those 5 years for what might be for 50 years, right, that's overreaching. You need to see and sell it according to the value that it is. And on the other hand, if there's 49 years to go and the seller is paying underpaying for that number of things, then that's overreaching on the part of the buyer. So it can go either way. And the Torah is saying, you look at the value and you don't try and trick people or overreach on people. You want to be fair to people. So let's stop the share there and give you a chance to comment if you would like.
So if you are by profession, like maybe by required profession, a money lender, or some kind of banker, or if you're a dealer, say in collectible items like records or whatever, I've worked in record stores. I mean, you have to make a living.
Right, exactly.
And sometimes that involves like a kind of big profit on one piece, knowing also that you're eating profits on other pieces. It's kind of balances out. And, if you're making a really good living, of course you want to give a lot of that money away, but nonetheless it's not like, I don't know ethically if it's always wrong to, like, for instance, to not charge interest, or to, if that's how you make your living, and you can't just lend the money and make a living, by getting it returned or not getting it returned.
Right.
Or as a dealer, you might have, underpay for a certain item, but you're doing that to help, your costs and to make a living.
Right. And I agree with you.
Yeah, and also,
I
okay.
agree.
Yeah, also, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lisa, and then David.
Thank you. Okay, I agree with you totally, Lauren, because my brother, we've dealt in jewelry and antiques and gold and silver and things like that. And some people get very good prices because they're really in need. And that is taken into consideration. And sometimes I have searched boxes and boxes and gotten my hands filthy dirty at flea markets and bought boxes of things and had an immense profit in those boxes, but also those people that were clearing things out, it lightened their load. So those kinds of things do balance out. I agree with you totally, Lauren, about that ethic, and that it does not have to apply completely across the board.
So
yeah,
David, go ahead, David.
Yeah, what I was going to say was it seems to, it also seems to kind of push away the notion, of negotiating and bargaining, because depending upon the objectives, right? Because the way that usually negotiating and bargaining objectives becomes a win-lose situation as opposed to a win-win. This promotes the idea of win-win, but we don't take it that way, right? So it almost says you shouldn't be doing that, because otherwise you fall into that win-lose trap as opposed to win-win. That's, which to me is interesting, because, a lot of things we do are based on that win-lose proposition as opposed to win-win.
Right. But if you have that win-win in your heart, you're also open to discovery. Such just recently happened with my brother, that a woman came into the store in need of basics for her child and wanted to sell something, and she thought it was worth a lot of money, and it wasn't. And so he gave her the honest truth about that. And then the people that work for him were overhearing this, and they took out of their pockets a collection from the store and gave it to her, along with her item back. So that kind of bargaining, in truth, can lead to great gifts.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a matter of how people, what people put in their heart, and then the protection, the protections against them, not having it in their heart, right? Which is kind of what and that's the balancing part, right? Because basically under this, if you listen to this carefully, right, corporate negotiators shouldn't exist, right? Because their whole job is made up of win-lose, not win-win. So that's yeah. But I think that's the balance is what's in your heart versus the protections against people, and not overstepping that. I don't know how that's put in place, but that's to me what we seem to should be able to strive for.
Lee?
I think Lee wants to say
Lee
something.
wants to say something.
Yeah. The rat is back and we have a leak, so I need to go help Paul deal with it. So I will not be here this morning.
Okay, well, thank you for taking care of yesterday, Lee, and good luck
Sure.
with the rat, okay?
Oh,
Thank you.
gosh.
Yeah, good luck. Sorry.
Good luck
to-
Good
on
Shabbat,
your
Lee.
Shabbat
Yeah.
shalom.
I'll bring you up to date next week.
Okay.
This is the second day in a row,
Oh,
so
my.
we're getting
So sorry. I'm so
anxious.
sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I
So-
know.
Have fun, guys. Have a
Take care.
good Shabbat.
Shabbat.
So take
Oh,
care.
Take care. So I was just going to say, so I know we need to get started, but again, if one sort of creates a situation here, and Lauren, I mean, I think the points you were making were all, halachically applied, right? So there's some of the stuff that involves tret that you mentioned, right? The other piece is that I would say that at least within the Torah, let's suppose someone sold you something and didn't know its value. And let's say they sold it to you for $10 and you made a huge profit on it. Now, exactly what a huge profit is, I'm not here to define, but let's say they sold it to you for $10, and just to make the point, you realized it was worth $1,000 and you got $1,000 for it. I think that if we were really acting according to Torah law, we would make sure that the person who sold that to us would also benefit.
Amen.
We wouldn't just take all that money, all that profit for ourselves. And I think that is now heading towards righteousness and not just taking advantage of people. So, by the way, one last word. So I was in a situation where I needed to sell some things. And on a couple of occasions, I went to a person and they would say to me, don't worry, I'll take care of you. And that phrase, I'll take care of you, you should realize you need to run away
Take
from
care
that
of me,
person.
it means.
That's what it means. That means I'll take care of you in an ironic sense. If you hear someone say to you in a business deal, I'll take care of you, get out of that deal if you're smart. Run away.
And you
That
don't
was what
forget
I
to turn
learned.
off the recording.
Anyway, yeah.
Very good, Rabbi.
All the best to everyone. Thank you. all.
I'll see